Hey everyone, and welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into something you might not expect today, herbicide injury.
Yeah.
It can actually be a problem for all kinds of farms, organic and conventional.
Mm.
We're also going to be looking at how a company called Farmonaut is using some pretty cool technology to help farmers stay ahead of this.
What's interesting is that a lot of times it's not a super obvious problem. Like it's subtle, almost like a mystery you have to solve.
Okay, so before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit more about Farmonaut? I know they use satellites and AI and all kinds of things to help farmers, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of like a digital guardian angel for crops, I guess you could say,
I like that.
giving farmers real-time information and advice about pretty much everything. Irrigation, pest control,
Uh-huh.
even early warnings about possible herbicide injury.
Very cool.
Okay.
So let's back up a little bit before we get into the whole detective work of spotting herbicide injury.
Sure.
What exactly are herbicides,
Yeah.
and why do farmers use them?
Well, herbicides are basically chemicals that get rid of unwanted plants, weeds.
Yeah.
They compete with crops for resources.
Right, right. So it's all about making sure those crops have the best chance to grow.
Exactly.
But, of course, there's a downside, herbicide injury. So what does that actually look like out in the field?
Well, imagine you're walking through a field and you see some leaves that look like they've been, I don't know, crimped with a curling iron,
Okay.
all twisted and distorted. That's a pretty telltale sign.
So it's not just that the plant looks a little wilted or yellow.
Not always. Sometimes it's more subtle than that. You might see something called chlorosis, which is a type of yellowing.
Okay.
But it's not just any yellowing. It usually follows a specific pattern,
Huh.
like stripes or blotches on the leaves.
Oh, interesting.
It's almost like the plant is trying to send a message.
Yeah. Like, hey, something's wrong here.
Exactly. So another sign is necrosis,
Okay.
which is basically dead plant tissue. It often looks like brown or black spots, like the plant's been burned. You might also see stunted growth, but that one can be tough to diagnose because other things can cause that too.
Right.
And then there's some really strange cases where the fruits or vegetables are deformed, like a tomato that looks like it's melting.
Okay, I'm not sure I want to picture that.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
So are these signs the same in organic and conventional farming? Because organic tries to stay away from synthetic herbicides, right?
Yeah. Organic farmers usually rely on things like hand weeding, cover crops, even flame weeding sometimes. It's a lot more labor intensive. And while they might use herbicides, they tend to be natural and less potent than the synthetic ones.
Okay.
So usually the symptoms are a bit milder and more localized in those systems.
So in conventional farming, where synthetic herbicides are more common, the damage can be more, I guess, severe, widespread.
Exactly. You might see a whole field that's been uniformly affected,
Wow.
which can mean big crop losses if it's not addressed quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So why does herbicide injury happen in the first place? Is it always the farmer miscalculating the amount to use?
It's actually rarely that straightforward. There's a lot of factors that play a role. For instance, even just the application method can make a big difference. If a farmer's sprayer isn't calibrated properly, it can lead to an uneven application. Some areas get too much, others get too little.
Oh, I see.
And then you've got Mother Nature throwing curveballs. Wind can blow the herbicide to places it shouldn't be, and that can damage neighboring crops. Even things like temperature and humidity can affect how the plant absorbs the herbicide and how long it stays in the environment.
So many things to consider. What about the plants themselves? Does their age or, what stage of development they're in make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. Think of it like this. Young seedlings are like little kids. Their systems aren't fully developed, so they're much more susceptible to harm.
Right. Makes sense.
A herbicide that wouldn't bother a mature plant could completely wipe out a field of seedlings.
Wow. So timing is really important.
Yeah, if you apply it at the wrong time, you could have a real disaster on your hands.
What are some other things that can contribute to herbicide injury?
Soil conditions are a big one that people often overlook. Different types of soil have different properties, which can affect how the herbicides behave. For example, clay soil holds onto herbicides more tightly than sandy soil, so there's a higher risk of injury there.
It's amazing how something as basic as soil type can play such a big role. Are there any other surprises when it comes to herbicide injury?
Well, one thing that's really important to be aware of is herbicide interactions.
Okay.
Sometimes two herbicides that are perfectly safe on their own can react with each other in the soil or in the plant and create a toxic compound.
Oh, wow.
So it's crucial to understand not just the individual herbicides you're using, but also how they might interact with each other and with the environment. And that's actually one area where technology, like what Farmonaut offers, can be a huge help.
And that's a perfect transition to my next question, which is about prevention. So what steps can farmers take to avoid becoming victims of this whole herbicide injury situation in the first place?
Well, the key is to be proactive. Really think like a detective.
Okay.
The first thing is to make sure that the spraying equipment is properly calibrated.
Right.
That way, you can ensure the herbicide is being applied evenly at the right amount and prevent any accidental overdoses.
Makes sense.
Uh,
So what other preventative measures should farmers be thinking about?
Weather monitoring is really important too.
Okay.
Farmers need to be aware of things like wind conditions, temperature, humidity, all of that.
Uh-huh.
That's how they can minimize drift and make sure the herbicide is actually effective. Imagine trying to spray a field on a super windy day. The herbicide could end up miles away.
Yeah, that's no good. It seems like common sense, but I can see how those surprise gusts of wind could really mess things up.
What about some more, long-term strategies? Are there farming practices that can help reduce the reliance on herbicides in the first place? Crop rotation is a great one. If you alternate different crops in the same field, you can disrupt the weed cycles and reduce the need for herbicides.
It's like keeping the weeds on their toes.
Exactly. And then there are those alternative weed control methods we talked about, like cover crops and hand weeding.
Right.
Those are part of a broader approach called integrated pest management, or IPM.
Okay.
This is where it gets really interesting because you're looking at the whole farm as an ecosystem. You're trying to create a healthy, balanced system.
So it's not just about spraying chemicals, it's about understanding the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's where Farmonaut's technology comes in.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like having a virtual advisor 204/7, helping farmers make smarter decisions and avoid those herbicide problems in the first place.
I can see how that kind of technology could be a game changer for farmers, especially for those trying to manage all these factors.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic, sometimes things happen, right?
Of course.
Even with the best plans, herbicide injury can still occur. It's not always completely avoidable.
You're right. Farming means working with living organisms, and you're always at the mercy of Mother Nature to some extent.
Exactly. So what happens when, even with all the preventative measures, herbicide injury strikes?
Yep.
What's the next step?
The first thing is to figure out what's actually going on. Is it really herbicide injury, or could it be something else? Like a nutrient deficiency or some kind of disease that just looks similar.
Oh, that's a good point. So gather the evidence first, like a real plant detective.
Exactly. Document everything carefully, take pictures, keep detailed records.
Yeah, good for tracking the problem over time, too.
Mm-hmm. And if they need to file an insurance claim.
Oh, right, of course. So let's say they've identified the cause.
Mm-hmm.
How do they actually help the plants recover?
Well, that's when the real work begins. They might need to change some of their management practices, like maybe increase irrigation to flush out the herbicide from the soil, or apply specific fertilizers to give the plants a boost.
Like a little extra TLC to help them bounce back.
Exactly.
What if the damage is really bad, though? Like, can those plants be saved?
Sometimes the only option is to replant. It's a tough decision for any farmer, but it might be the best way to save the season.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a really hard call to make,
Yeah.
especially after they've already put in so much time and effort. Are there any resources out there that can help farmers who are dealing with this?
Oh, definitely. There are agricultural experts, extension services, and more of these tech platforms like Farmonaut are offering a lot of support.
That's where Farmonaut really comes in, right?
Yeah.
They're using technology to not just prevent, but also manage herbicide injury.
Exactly. One of the coolest tools they have is satellite monitoring.
So it's like having eyes in the sky keeping watch over the fields.
Pretty much.
But how does that actually work?
Well, the satellites are collecting all sorts of data about the plants that we can't really see from the ground.
Okay.
For example, they can detect changes in chlorophyll content.
Chlorophyll, that's what makes plants green, right?
Yep, and it's a sign of how well the plant is photosynthesizing.
Which means?
Basically, how well it's converting sunlight into energy.
Got it. So if a plant's stressed, maybe from herbicide injury,
Yeah.
that'll show up in the chlorophyll levels.
Exactly, and that's just one thing they can see. The satellites can also see variations in plant height, canopy density, even moisture levels.
So it's like an X-ray vision for crops.
I like that, yeah.
And you can really see what's going on beneath the surface.
Hmm.
It's pretty amazing. But all that information isn't really helpful unless you know what to do with it. How does Farmonaut help farmers use this data?
That's where their AI-powered advisories come in.
Okay.
It's like having a virtual consultant, available 24/7 to give advice based on the specific needs of each field.
Oh, that's awesome. Can you give an example? Like, what kind of advice would this AI give?
Let's say the satellite images show that there's some stress in one part of the field. The AI would look at all the data. Things like soil type, weather conditions, the kind of herbicide that was used, and then maybe it would recommend adjusting the irrigation schedule or applying a certain type of fertilizer to help the plants in that area recover.
So a personalized prescription for the crops,
Yeah, something like that.
all thanks to a satellite hundreds of miles away.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty wild. All this talk about herbicides and damage has got me thinking, though. From consumers' perspective, what should we be aware of when it comes to herbicides in our food?
That's a great question. And it's good to be informed. The good news is there are agencies all over the world that have set strict limits on how much herbicide residue is allowed in food. They're constantly monitoring and testing things to make sure those levels are safe.
Okay, that's good to know. So there are safeguards in place. Are there things that we as consumers can do to minimize our exposure?
Washing fruits and vegetables thoroughly before you eat them is always a good idea, whether they're organic or conventional.
Right.
And if you're concerned about herbicides, choosing organic produce can be a good option too.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee that there are no herbicides, but it does mean that no synthetic herbicides were used.
Right.
I think the main takeaway here is that we need to support farmers who are committed to using herbicides responsibly, whether they're using conventional or organic methods.
I agree. It's important to understand how complex the food system is and that farmers face all sorts of challenges.
Absolutely.
And companies like Farmonaut are helping them navigate those challenges and find solutions that are good for both their business and the environment.
Speaking of solutions, let's look ahead a bit. What are some of the new trends in agriculture that are focused on reducing herbicide reliance and preventing injury? What's on the horizon?
One really exciting development is precision application technology.
Right.
It's basically giving farmers a much more targeted way to control weeds. Instead of just spraying herbicide over the whole field, they can use sensors and GPS to target specific weeds.
So less herbicide overall, less risk of drift. That's great.
Exactly. And then there's a lot of research happening on biopesticides.
Biopesticides.
Yeah, they're derived from natural sources like bacteria, fungi, even some plants. They offer a potentially safer and more eco-friendly alternative to synthetic herbicides.
Huh. It's like using nature to fight nature. What else is out there?
Well, plant breeders are working on developing crop varieties that are resistant to specific herbicides.
Oh, wow.
So farmers could use those herbicides without harming their crops.
It sounds like the future of farming is all about finding these smarter, more sustainable ways to deal with weeds. What role do you see technology playing in all of this?
I think technology is going to be essential. We're already seeing the impact of things like satellite monitoring, AI advisories, and precision application.
Right.
But the really big change is going to be when all these technologies are combined into what's being called smart farming.
Smart farming.
Yeah, imagine a future where sensors in the field, drones in the air, satellites in space are all working together, collecting data, analyzing trends, and giving farmers real-time insights.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like a whole network working together to make farming more efficient and sustainable.
Exactly. I think it's a future worth getting excited about. But before we get too carried away, let's circle back to Farmonaut for a minute.
Okay.
What are they doing to promote sustainable farming practices beyond what we've already talked about?
Yeah, they're already doing so much with the satellite monitoring and the AI, but I'm curious to hear about their bigger vision for the future of agriculture. What are they doing to empower farmers and really make a difference?
One of their big goals is to make data-driven decision-making more common in agriculture. They're collecting tons of data from all these different sources, satellites, sensors, all that, and then using AI to analyze it and give farmers useful advice so they can make decisions based on evidence, not just guesswork.
It's like a crystal ball,
Yeah.
but with actual real-time data instead of vague predictions.
Exactly. And this approach can really make a difference for sustainability.
Right.
Imagine a farmer using Farmonaut to figure out the best way to irrigate their crops. If they can really tailor the water to what the plants need, they'll conserve water, reduce runoff, and even prevent nutrients from leaching out of the soil.
So good for the farmer's budget and good for the environment.
Right. It's not just talk, they're actually doing things to make farming more sustainable.
Do you have any specific examples of how they're working with farmers to make that happen?
Yeah, for sure. They've got projects going on all over the world. For example, they're working with farmers in areas that are prone to drought to help them come up with water-efficient irrigation strategies.
Okay.
They use satellite data to keep an eye on how stressed the plants are from lack of water, and then give the farmers real-time advice about when and how much to irrigate.
It's amazing how they're combining high tech with something as old as farming.
Yeah, it is.
But what about the farmers themselves? How are they adapting to all this new technology? It seems like it could be a big adjustment, especially for those who aren't that tech savvy.
It's definitely a learning curve, but a lot of farmers are really embracing these tools. They see it as an opportunity, not a threat. Especially the younger generation, they've grown up with this stuff, so it's pretty natural for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what about farmers who aren't as comfortable with all the bells and whistles? Is Farmonaut doing anything to help them get up to speed?
Yeah, definitely. They know that's a challenge, so they've made their technology really user-friendly.
Oh,
Their mobile apps are designed to be intuitive and easy to use, even for people who aren't super techy.
that's good.
They also offer lots of training and support to make sure all farmers can benefit from the technology.
That's great. It sounds like they're really trying to make sure everyone can access this, no matter their tech skills.
Yeah.
Even with all this progress, though, it's hard to imagine a future where herbicide injury just disappears completely.
Yeah.
There are just so many factors involved, like the weather, the specific conditions in each field.
You're right. Farming is this intricate balance between what humans do and what nature does. There will always be challenges, things we can't predict. But I think the important thing is that we're moving in the right direction.
I agree.
With new technology, better understanding of sustainable practices, and a focus on responsible herbicide management, we can reduce the risks and create a system that's more resilient and productive.
It's been a really fascinating look into the world of herbicides, from the challenges of herbicide injury to all the amazing solutions companies like Farmonaut are developing. And I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
It's been great exploring this with you. And to everyone listening out there, whether you're a farmer, a consumer, or just someone who cares about where their food comes from, remember there's always more to learn. Stay curious, ask questions, and let's keep discovering the incredible world of agriculture together.
That's a great message. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of herbicides and the future of farming. And for our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Farmonaut and the amazing work they're doing, head over to their website or download their app. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.